All right, we are back here talking some hockey on the podcast here. Four Nations is in the books here. Very fun tournament. NHL second half back underway. Join me today to break it all down. Our hockey guy on the podcast, the host of the Sports in the Waiting Room podcast, Christopher Russo is back with us. Christopher, how are you?
Good, thanks, Mike. I appreciate you having me back.
Yeah, a lot of fun chatting hockey with you here. And so we got to start with Four Nations here because I don't think a lot of us thought it was going to be as good as it was when this format was first announced. Because, I mean, only four teams, obviously, no Russia, given the whole situation with Ukraine and the war and the international ban for the competition here. But we got some great games. We got memorable moments here. The gold medal match, the thrill here. So, what was your take on the Four Nation tournament?
I hate to say I couldn't see all of it. I was working a good amount of it, and the real sad that well, no, to be fair, I got to see most of the game, most of the championship game. I was doing a little thing for a Seton Hall Facebook group, so I didn't really get to see much of the second period, but otherwise great. The real killer was I did not get to see pretty much any, at least or almost any live of the Saturday night game, the U.S. Canada game in Montreal, because I was working something that kind of ties in with this whole thing, and I think the future of this event and the future of best on best hockey, which is I was working a New Jersey Titans game in the North American Hockey League. I was doing public address, and that's the whole thing that not a lot of people who aren't inside hockey don't understand is that the whole CHL decision. I'm sure you're familiar with it. That yeah, so the NCAA is allowing CHL players to play now, and that's really hurting USA hockey. And so just a bump down from that. And the truth is, this tournament is going to be very important because really only the U.S. can gain anything. And I think the USA hockey should be set up pretty well for how intense this tournament was, how much of a fight the U.S. put up, and how hungry American kids are going to be, whether they're playing now or whether they're going to start playing because they're watched this tournament. And that's going to be absolutely huge.
Yeah,
The
for
tournament itself, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I say for sure. And like those things are so wild too, because like going into this gold medal match, obviously, you know, like both sides had some injuries. Obviously, McAvoy couldn't play for the US. There was this whole Quinn Hughes fiasco. Like, is he coming? Is he not coming? But like it's on paper, the skaters look pretty even. You figured the US had an edge in net with Connor Hellebuck over Jordan Bennington, and then this Bennington stood on his head and stole that game.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And it's not too dissimilar, truthfully, from game seven between the Bruins and the Blues because the Bruins look like the better team in the first period of that game back in 2019. And Binnington just stood on his head. Binnington in the first period of game seven was Binnington in overtime last night. And he was phenomenal. And the U.S. probably deserved to win that game, but it was just the same way things went. And it's also the same way things went in 2010. The U.S. won the group stage game in Vancouver, and then of course they won in Canada this time, and then they lost the title game in overtime, 3-2, and so just a complete turn of events. But truthfully, yeah, Jordan Binnington was the most valuable player of that game, at least. I'm not sure if I could argue the tournament.
Yeah, also right down to the best player in the world, like scoring the go ahead the game winning goal for Canada with Crosby in 2010 and Connor McDavid here.
Yeah, except I think this 2010 you at least had an argument where it was like Crosby or Ovechkin, maybe even throw Patrick Kane into the mix. But I don't think there's any doubt right now that Connor McDavid is the best player in the world. I don't think there's really much doubt. I don't think there should be much doubt that he's probably the best player since Mario Lemieux. And the things he has done, him scoring 1,000 points in less than 10 seasons, he is probably on a pace to be, if he's not there already, be a top 3 or 4 player in the history of the sport. And so he's been absolutely remarkable. He's among the best skaters ever. But the truth is, at the very end of that, it's a missed defensive assignment, even though the U.S. had played the best they possibly could defensively for the vast majority of that game. I remember hearing Mark Messier and PK Subban during the intermission report really praise the American Defense Corps. But the truth is, Mike, you do throw that out there. It is true in my opinion. If Quinn Hughes is in this game, I know he's not 100% necessarily, but Quinn Hughes is the best defenseman in the NHL right now, at least on par with Cale Makar. He's definitely the best American defenseman right now. If he's in that game, the truth is, I think it's even an improvement over Charlie McAvoy. That's Hughes was supposed to be on the roster in the first place. That's probably a huge difference. Now, I think it's a forward missed assignment anyway, because the truth is that centering fee goes in behind Matthews anyway. But Connor McDavid's all alone. That's not a bad goal to give up if you're Hellebuck. He just targets it perfectly. That's a shot that you see in the All-Star skills competition.
Yeah, that's true here. And obviously, this is the warm up to next year having the NHL players back to the Olympics the first time since Sochi 2014. American fans remember that was the TJ Oshie tournament where he had the huge game against Russia in one of the group stage games. So, what do you think we learned here in this event about what we're going to see in Italy next February?
Well, I think for one thing, we know that Canada's still the best, and U.S. is probably still the second best. Now, the Russians will probably make an argument against that. Now, whether the thing is, the external events are going to be able to dictate whether the Russians can actually participate in this, and a lot of Russian players will probably argue that it won't be a legitimate tournament without the Russians. But it's been a country that's in a region that's been in disarray for pretty much the entirety of the modern Olympics anyway. When you go from the Soviet Union to the unified team to East and West Germany, whatever. But it's going to be interesting to watch. I think people realize how dedicated these guys really are to their countries, because there's been talk that Matthew Tkachuk could be done for the year after all of this. And he'll probably tell you it was worth it, even for a silver medal and coming a goal short, really coming one or two huge stops from Jordan Binnington away from winning the title. And so I think it just shows that, again, these teams are really passionate. And then you look at somebody like David Pastrnak, who was pretty mad that the Czech Republic was not included in this tournament. And the truth is, they probably could have been. You look at the Czech Republic, Austria, Denmark, Germany. These are all countries that are very underappreciated in terms of their hockey ability. But the problem with that is, with the four nations, you're not going to take players from other leagues during their All-Star break unless it's during the Olympics. And so that was the only way this could happen. You're not going to fill an entire roster with NHL players on those countries. So that was a huge issue. So I think just getting the wider berth of seeing the really good countries that are going to be able to compete, in addition to Sweden and Finland, I think, again, we learned that Canada has great goaltending at the end of the day. But I think one thing we really learned, because like Gary Bettman was the one and the owners were the ones who really shut down these players wanting to play in international tournaments for the last 11, 12 years or so. And I think it just, again, proves the players' commitment to want to play in this. And I think it also, again, proves that the competition gap between Canada and the U.S. is still very narrow.
Yeah. I think in terms of the Bettman point, I think this is also important to remember that like this decision was made when I think before the 2018 games were in South Korea, where like the league basically did this for marketing purposes. We don't see a point in stopping our season, sending guys to South Korea, whereas they wanted to go to China in 2022, but the COVID like stuff and the like delays in the season having to make up games sort of scuttle that one here. Like the way with some of these sites coming up here, I think they realized they made a mistake leaving the international stage and are now committed to just going back to it full time.
Well, the truth is, even if you talk about South Korea or China, yeah, I understand. Aside from Russia and maybe Kazakhstan, I can think of next to an exception. Nick Antropov's a big one. There are some guys who come from Northern Asia, but with the exception of the more Soviet era countries, Asia is not really a huge hockey market. However, you look at what the NFL has done with their international series, you look at what the NBA has done with their stars, you look at what Major League Baseball has done. The NHL is very capable of growing as a sport. And if you're the NHL, you want to go play in the Olympics because it is a great marketing point. It is a great marketing tactic, and it allows you to show these places where hockey isn't as developed, where you go to South America, Africa, Austria and Oceania, and most of Asia, and even a good portion, truthfully, look at a lot of Southern Europe and the Southern North America. It allows you to completely grow the game, and you hope that maybe somewhere you'll get some funding for these things to actually happen.
Yeah, that's true here. And the other thing is, I think, takeaway from this tournament as well is that the Canadian goaltending question, I think, was definitely answered, because I know people going in were saying, oh, Canada doesn't have their goalie situation figured out. It's a nation that gave us, Marty Brodeur, Patrick Waugh, always seem to have that legacy of great goaltenders. And then we were scrambling for a little bit. Oh, we're going to have Joey Daccord go dual citizenship so he can participate for Canada here. But Jordan Binnington standing on his head here shows that, like, Canada will find a way to find a goalie. It may not be like Hall of Fame level. They'll have somebody good enough to win international competition.
Yeah, it's true. Look, Canada's produced definitely the two best goaltenders of all time, but it's a smorgasbord, and it is funny to think of American goaltenders. We think of American goaltenders in the Hall of Fame. What do we think of? We think of pretty much, I think, Tom Barrasso. You think of God, who am I missing? Jonathan Quick's going to be. There probably should be more. I've said, we talk about the Rangers a lot. I probably said Mike Richter should be one, maybe John Van Beesbrook, but it's a very, very small, limited list. But obviously, when you look at a guy like Connor Hellebuck, who has won the Vezina, who is maybe on pace to win it again this year, it's very different. But Canada, that's the thing. If you're a goaltender, especially if you're Canada and you're in that scheme, which is you're playing behind the best team, you just want to be able to play to the score. The sort of Mike Smith situation, I suppose, and that has tended to work. The Canadians pulled it off, and you just need a guy who's in there to make the big save. We've said it the last couple of years with Vegas with Adin Hill or Colorado with Darcy Kemper. It's guys who are not necessarily top tier goaltenders, but ultimately just make the big save at the right time when you've got a really solid group of 18 skaters in front of you.
Yeah, it's true here. And obviously, there's a lot of speculation coming out of this tournament as well. It's like, should the NHL just like scrap the All-Star game and just do international stuff like all the time in their breaks? As we know, next year they're having an All-Star game at UBS, but they're using it as a send-off for the international competition for the Olympics. They played the Olympics 2030, 28. They're talking about doing a World Cup of Hockey in February with 8 teams, it games in US and Europe. So I think like there's a point where like you can't do this every single year, but like I think this might be a thing where like every other year you're having a tournament in February.
Yeah, I would say at the very least it should be every other year there should be an all-star game because it is a tradition. It is part of the NHL. Truth is, I appreciate the NHL All-Star Skills Competition as much as just about any all-star event, in any sport. Now look, I say this because again, it's a nostalgic feeling. It's what you grew up with. But I grew up on a dunk contest where Dwight Howard is coming out of the booth as Superman, and and Nate Robinson is Lex Luthor. He comes in with his kryptonite. I go back to Alexander Ovechkin, carrying 2 sticks and during a shootout, having the little what is it, the little kind of not Kangol hat, but the safari hat on and sunglasses. It's the showmanship of it. I think that's very important. The All Star game itself is, it is what it is, but it does allow guys, regardless of league. Because if you're a Russian player, look, you look at some of the best Russian players in the world. There are a lot of Russian players and Czech players. You look at Pasternak and probably Austrian, German. You look at Leon Draisaitl. There are a lot of guys who deserve their due, and you might not get that at an international level for some time. But it's like people have said this about the stadium series a little bit in the outdoor games, where if you have multiple games or if you have 3 or more, sometimes you can dilute the experience. You can water down the experience. And I don't want that to happen. I think they should go to the Olympics every 4 years. I'd be okay with them going and doing a World Cup of Hockey, on the alternating second year. But I can't think that more than half the time they should do this.
I agree with you. My sentiment is, sort of like if you want to use the All-Star game to sort of send them to the Olympics like we're doing next year, fine. The odd years you can do the All-Star game and have that be the 10th pole, that's fine. If you want to skip it every 4th year for World Cup of Hockey to have more teams involved, that's fine. But like to me, like if you do this every year, it loses a lot of its luster. Because like then you have people saying, oh, just another, international tournament. Like this, why does this one matter? Then you'll start seeing, I think at some point you eventually have the diminishing returns where some of the stars say, I did my time already. I don't have to go this time.
Exactly. You're going to be, guys will think, is this really going to? It's going to be like when guys, back out of the home run derby, where the Bobby Abreu effect, where they think, oh, it's going to ruin my season. How am I going to do? Or you look at a guy like Kachuk, and some people, if you do this every year, some guys are going to start to think, oh, well, is it worth it for my country if that means my team, my club team, whatever, my NHL team is going to miss me down the stretch of the regular season and into the playoffs. So that's why I think that's another great reason why it shouldn't be every year, because eventually, people just take it for granted.
Yeah, and I think a good comparison sort of be like some of the issues that like there have been points where the NBA has had issues sending like their top players to the Olympics, notably '04 when the US loses the gold medal for the only time in the pro era, and then the COVID games at Tokyo here. Like there are points, where like, the stars, I did my time, I'm not going back, I'm not getting out my summer vacation for this. I already did my turn. So like use every other year, like you might have some guys saying, like I played in the Olympics. Like I'm gonna take off World Cup because I want to have like time with my family or something.
Yeah, there's a reason the Olympics are every 4 years in the first place. It takes a lot of training, it takes a lot of discipline, it takes a lot of hard work. Now, it's different when you have, a sport like gymnastics where you don't necessarily compete on a regular basis. It's completely different when you have, when you
Swimming.
have, yeah, swimming. It's completely different when you have something like baseball, a more typical sport, baseball, basketball, hockey, even, soccer, tennis, golf, some of these more regularly played sports. Whereas you see like Olympics, you see gymnastics, you see bobsled, you see, and I'm speaking about, summer and winter, you see luge, curling, whatever. You only really see these things at an international level. You don't see you don't see a full league of curling being played, on ESPN every 5 minutes throughout North America.
Yeah, you're not getting like the regional track competition in the US on like anything other than like a streaming service.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a high paying streaming service on top of that.
Yeah, it's like probably like Peacock. You might get some of that stuff, like in terms of like just like filling stuff in. Like I know like they'll do like gymnastic qualifiers on NBC because people watch that, but like some of these smaller sports, like compared to like hockey or these team sports, it's harder when you have the team motivations factor in as well.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I not too long ago, I finished reading Dick Ebersol's book, and he had mentioned it's fascinating. It's a fascinating read, by the way. But he mentioned, a lot of it is getting the Olympics to NBC, and part of it was, I believe, it was in 2000. It kind of backfired. It was the NBC Gold package, where I think you could pay just pretty much throw a lot of money and watch every single event of the. It was a pay-per-view thing. Watch every single event of the Olympics. And if you're going to, unless you're doing it kind of a la carte, it's not really something that works. But it's definitely not something that works if it's, you're going to be watching that all the time. Nobody is watching, all the following: badminton, cross country, javelin, watching all of those sports all the time for all 4 years, and then again and again and again.
Yeah, it's true. Let's get back to the NHL season, which is now back underway as the time you're listening to this here. So go through the three locals real quick. The Rangers here. Obviously, there's been a lot of movement with the roster over the course of the year. We had Jacob Trouba gone, Capo Caco, Philip Peel out, JT Miller in, Will Borgen in and extended, a couple other pieces in here. So thoughts on this roster here, and like, where do you think that like the tweaking is done? Because obviously the Rangers have a couple of pending free agents coming up here, and Ryan Lindgren, Riley Smith, that could be deadline candidates to move.
It's a possibility. I think Ryan Lindgren is probably, I think based on performance, more likely to be moved than Riley Smith. I think the Rangers should be relatively satisfied with him. And Ryan Lindgren is not nearly as big an issue as Jacob Trouba was from a defensive standpoint. I think Keandre Miller has improved to the point where he has started to earn his job back. I'd said he'd been a defensive liability for about a year and a half now. But I think this is still a roster that honestly could win the Stanley Cup. The fact is, you just got to get in. I've said this time and time again, and the truth is, you don't want to win the President's Trophy because it's just pointless. You just have to get in. I've seen them match up well with some of the better teams in the conference. I still think if the Washington Capitals are listed as the best team in the NHL, you shouldn't have that much to worry about. You're crossing your fingers that the Florida Panthers win the President's Trophy because that's the one team that should truly scare you still. And even then, if Matthew Tkachuk is out, the Eastern Conference, don't get me wrong, Panthers are a really good team without him. But if he's out, much more doubtful about their chances as repeating as conference champions, let alone winning the Stanley Cup again. So the Eastern Conference is wide open at that point. I think Carolina is vulnerable because of their history with the Rangers. I still think their goaltending is questionable for sure. I saw, the Rangers got beaten by the Hurricanes a few weeks ago at Madison Square Garden. It was not pretty, but or at least if you're a Ranger fan. But even then, you're not going to expect that from Frederick Anderson every night. That is not who he is. Their goaltending is good, but it's inconsistent. I don't think the Devils are particular. The Rangers played one of their best games of the year against the Devils. That goal by Sam Carrick in overtime. You look at Islanders have been hot, but I don't know. I think the Rangers are still a Stanley Cup contender, even though their window is closing.
Yeah, it's true here. And the season with the Rangers is interesting because you look at like where they are because like as you mentioned, like coming out of the break, they're only a couple points out of the postseason spot, couple of games in hand. The teams that had them don't look too daunting, whether it's Detroit, Ottawa, you got Columbus there, the Islanders are hovering around there, Pittsburgh, Montreal, Boston. No, nobody's super overwhelming at the same time here. There's a reason all these teams are in this cluster because they can't get string it together consistently. And the Rangers had showed flashes after their month-long tail, so that put them in this position. But you just wonder here, like, does this group have another hot streak in them?
Yeah, I think so. You've got a lot of time left in this season. You've got 2 months or so, roughly 2 months, and then of course the Four Nations break is probably going to help you out a little bit. The truth is, I think you're also going to be helped by Shesterkin getting a little bit of rest. The truth is, most of these guys getting a little bit of rest because believe it or not, the Rangers did not have a Canadian representative at the Four Nations. They did have the most Americans, which was four. I believe they had one Swede and one Finn. And again, so there's no All-Star break, and a lot of the guys are still well rested. You look at, for example, the Russians in particular, Artemi Panarin. You look at Igor Shesterkin, who's been a little banged up as of late. Jonathan Quick will be one as well. They're going to have a number of guys who are well rested, and I think you're also going to have a guy in Peter Laviolette and guys like Kreider, the guys on the U.S. team in particular, Kreider, Fox, Trocheck, and JT Miller, who are going to be very hungry after losing that tournament. So I think they are definitely in a good spot. I don't think their schedule is that daunting necessarily. Obviously, they've been able to stand up to teams like, they beat Vegas on the road when they were the best team in the league. So I think that there is certainly a good chance of them still making the playoffs.
Yeah, it's true. And the break, as I mentioned at the top of the show, well timed for the Rangers because Shesterkin gets hurt right before the break, and you figure you play the 2 weeks out. Like they're like, even if you factor in a couple days All-Star break, you're still probably missing like 5, 6 games of Igor Shesterkin here. So you miss maybe one basically with the time of the break.
Yeah, and you go back to that last game before the break for them. It was against Pittsburgh, and they lost 3-2. And they are probably a better team than the Penguins. They played better against them generally this year, but it was a third period where the Penguins had no shots, and they were pretty much just content to keep flipping to center. Crosby did not play in that game. The Rangers looked like the better squad, at least in the third period, and probably in the first period as well. They gave up 3 goals in the second. And ultimately, but that's not playoff hockey. No team is going to be content just to flip to center ice for 20 minutes and just continue to ice the puck.
Yeah, that's true. Let's go to the other teams in the area real quick. Go to the Devils because obviously they start out the year red hot. Once the calendar flips to January, they have not been the same team. There's been a lot of issues of consistency. They're still in a safe spot where you figure they're probably the 2 or 3 in the Metro, depending on how things shake out with them and the Hurricanes here. But like, what's your concern level with the Devils with the struggles after January 1st?
I wouldn't say particularly high. I think they are, I think they're starting to cool off. And look, maybe the fact that Sheldon Keefe is there is just an example of that. But it's an ebb and flow. It's an ebb and flow type thing. You need to get hot at the right time. You look at Pittsburgh a few years ago, and they got hot at the right time. You look at St. Louis, they got hot at the right time. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to cool off right now. It still looks like it's the Devils and Carolina really jostling for those 2 and 3 spots. And, we'll see where things go from there. There's still a lot of time left in this season. I don't think they need to be particularly concerned.
Yeah, and obviously the deadline's still coming up here. They're going to be adding. What do you think they should be adding?
I think maybe offense, maybe some defense. I think probably the defense core. They could probably use an equal amount of offensive-minded and defensive-minded defensemen. You look at Dougie Hamilton, who is pure goal scorer, but how strong is he on the back end? Really, you can still wonder at his age. So I think it's more so on the back end. They're a very, very smart team. You have one of the best, maybe, I don't know if he's on the level of Alexander Barkov or Lindholm, but Nico Hischier is one of the best two-way players in the league, one of the best defensive forwards in the league. There's great leadership in that room. I think maybe a veteran could be necessary in that room as well, because obviously they've been to the playoffs in recent years, got to the second round a couple of years ago, but I think somebody who has, I know it's considered a cliche, but someone who's been in a conference final, been in a final, won the cup before could really be a huge help in that room, because obviously even with Sheldon Keefe, that hasn't come to pass either. He hasn't won, at least at the head coaching level yet.
Yeah, it's true. Let's go to the Islanders as well here because they're kind of floundering their way through the early part of the season. They get hot over the last month and a half. They go 11-5 their last 16 games for the break. Do you think that this is a sign that this team can, keep it going and sneak in the playoffs, or you feel like the formation break really hurts their momentum here because like they were red hot. They know they lost two before the break, but now you have to sit around for 2 weeks. A couple of guys played Four Nations, but like you wondered, is the team who was hot like the Islanders, is that momentum killer here, the Four Nation break?
It was a tough time for it, but I think again, you look at this team and you look at, Brock Nelson is probably going to get, even at his age, probably going to get some valuable experience from playing Four Nations. You're going to look at some of your best guys. Barzal, got some rest. Sorokin got some rest. And I think they're going to be fine. And clearly, they are still in a space where they are in that cluster. The truth is, the Eastern Conference is one where really, it much more so than the Western. The Eastern Conference, anybody can make the playoffs. Even Buffalo, with somehow they've regressed this year. Even with all of what they've done this year, I still think anybody can make the playoffs. And so the Islanders should be satisfied with what they've done as of late, and I think very able and willing to be able to build off of that coming out of it.
Yeah, that's an interesting spot here for the deadline too, because they have a lot of guys on expiring contracts, big core players, including Brock Nelson. You mentioned Lou Lamoriello usually stays the course with his teams. He doesn't like to sell if he doesn't have to here, but given the mushy middle here, like if they jumped the line, said, we're gonna put some guys up, they could really replenish their pick pool and their prospect pools they really need here. So, do you think Lou stays? Do you think he buys? Do you think he sells? What do you think Lou does?
I think he's got to know when to hold them. Know when. I think he's going to stay firm. I don't think he's really going to be particularly active at the deadline. That's not necessarily something you've seen with him a lot with the Islanders, with the major exception, of course, of the Bo Horvat and coughing up Anthony Beauvillier. But I don't see him making major moves. I think he knows that. I think making that move and letting Matt Martin walk in the offseason was a difficult decision, but it was a decision that had to be made for an aging core, that group of Martin, Cizikas, and Clutterbuck. And I think he knows the young talent he has. I think he's going to probably be content, whether that keeps them a Stanley Cup contender and puts them in the best situation. I don't know, but that is the trend we've seen from him in the last few years.
Yeah, I do feel like Lou's gonna hold. I don't think he's gonna like, like a lot of the fantasy, like this group is kind of on its last legs. Maybe he should like sell and kind of retool a little bit. I don't think Lou likes the idea of, like giving up when his team is in striking distance of the playoff spot.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think he's become more conservative in working with the Islanders than he was with even then he was pretty smart with the Devils. He did a lot of his work, I think, through he really did a lot of his work through the draft, and it was very complimentary or supplementary rather, in terms of his free agent work and his moves at the deadlines. And I think he's been pretty conservative with the Islanders, generally speaking.
Yeah, and let's go around with things generally league-wide here. Obviously, trade deadline's coming up soon. We have had a couple of big deals. Obviously, JT Miller trade with the Rangers, the big Mikko Rantanen trade to Carolina here. Like, what are you looking for at the deadline? You think we have some more big pieces on the move? What are you keeping your eye on?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing with that Rantanen move is those are two teams that I think probably made themselves better in Colorado and Carolina, who are both serious Stanley Cup contenders. And so I think here's the thing: Colorado's won the Stanley Cup in their window. Carolina should be hungrier. So I think the real question is, you look at a team like Colorado. and you're going to wonder how much of a splash are they willing to make at the deadline? How hungry do you think they're going to be? How much do they think they'll need? So I think it's going to be more about teams like them. I would say Washington is also another team to keep an eye on because it's Ovechkin, it's an aging core, but there has been a good amount of youth injected into that team that has under Spencer Carberry skyrocketed to the top of the league. So I wonder, what do they think is necessary to make this not a good regular season team, but a good playoff team? What allows them to play good playoff hockey? So those are a couple I say keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think for me too, I think out west with like Winnipeg, and I was going for the President's Trophy and the contention there, but like their team has been great regular season, not great the postseason. We know Connor Hellebuyck's had his playoff struggles here, and like we know the team as a whole has had issues drawing fans in the market, and they want to get butts in seats basically to keep the franchise like viable there long term. So you wonder if they look at this team and say, you know what, we're good enough to win the cup this year. Should we, be more aggressive at the deadline and get like a big piece to help us like try and push it over the top?
Yeah, it's a move I don't know if they're willing to make, and they're willing to go for broke, but I also don't think that's a franchise that's really going to be leaving Winnipeg. I don't think they're leaving again. And playoff seats are going to be through the roof. People love hockey. If people love hockey in the United States and in Boston and are that willing to buy tickets at over $1,250 for a Four Nations tournament, that is, yeah, it's best on best, but it's not Olympics, it's not World Cup even. And so people are absolutely going to buy tickets in Winnipeg for the postseason. It's a franchise that's going to continue to be viable. I don't know if they're going to be overly aggressive, but I think they still need a little bit of age in that room. I still think it's a relatively young team, relatively inexperienced team in terms of deep Stanley Cup playoff runs.
Yeah, it's true. And last thing here, so obviously we're coming back in here. Like, who are your top contenders for the cup this year? Because I know, like, if you told us, if we talked to you in like October and said after Four Nations, Washington and Winnipeg will be fighting for the President's Trophy, you probably would have laughed in my face that this is ridiculous. But are they in that tier? Or you think there's like other teams that are more likely to win the cup?
I think Winnipeg is a lot more likely than Washington because they've looked scarier the last few years to me. What Washington has essentially been in a retool, I think. But I don't think either of those teams is the best or the most playoff ready in their respective conferences. I'd probably say I'm going to be fascinated to see how Florida handles the Kachuk situation. That's going to be crucial. I don't know if maybe they do anything at the deadline because you kind of banked on him a lot, and you banked on Reinhardt a lot for sure because they let go of a lot. They had to let go of a lot of their, you know, bottom six guys, their, bottom 3, 4 defensemen. So I am fascinated to see how they're going to manage without him and how long they will have to manage without him. If they have him by the playoffs, then it could end up being a Mark Stone type situation where not as manipulative nearly, but I think they would probably still be the team to watch in the East. If not, I'd say Carolina. I don't think Toronto is that big a danger, big a threat necessarily, but you never know. If you're a Leafs fan, you're hoping that Matthews comes back really hungry and he pairs up with the experience that Marner has gotten from Four Nations. And then the Western Conference, Colorado, it's still probably a Colorado and Vegas conference. Those are two teams that have been weaker at times this season. I'm still waiting for Dallas to take that next step. I've expected them to do it for the last couple of years. They're probably the Western Conference equivalent, rather, of Colorado or Carolina. I'm also interested to see if the Kings can finally make that leap. But Edmonton, obviously, is another one that I'd throw out there who's had a surprisingly strong regular season where they've actually built on what they did last year.
Yeah, I think to me, I see it as a bucket of five. I'd be surprised, barring, injury, somebody getting really hot in the playoffs, that it would be outside of this group of Florida, Carolina, Winnipeg, Edmonton, and Vegas. I think if it comes outside of those five teams, I'd be surprised.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, look from a historical standpoint, Winnipeg being thrown in there is probably the real X factor. And you've got a couple of teams with significant experience in the Western Conference in Colorado and Vegas, who have won in the last couple of years. But I would tend to agree with you.
Yeah, I think I put my chip. If I'm putting a chip on, I'm putting a chip on Edmonton. I think especially last year, getting all the way to the final, like the desperation factor, and McDavid is in his prime for so long. Like, and they have to get him sign an extension eventually. So like, get that cup. It's a lot easier to say, hey, like stick around forever and not be tempted to go elsewhere.
Yeah, there has never been a player in the NHL that has gone this long, that has been this good and gone this long into his career before winning the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, because I know like he's a free agent after what 26.
I would think so. And the truth is, if they're willing to throw the money at him, he's from Toronto. I mean, that would be a super team. I know people would think, Dodger adjacent, but that's just one of many opportunities for him, even as a captain. I think that's the one thing that really ties him in Edmonton is the fact that he's been a captain and he's played there for a decade now, and he's been to a final there, but he may have to go somewhere else to make his mark.
Yeah, I mean, like you look at some of the teams that could have cap space in 26. Obviously Toronto, I'm sure can do if they, sacrifice a guy or two off the core this year. The Rangers, I think the Panarin contract is finally up at that point. So like you could see them trying to say, hey, original six, follow the Messier legacy, come here and win a cup. Like there's a lot of teams like Pittsburgh, you want to say like 6C Crosby has sort of become the guy. Like there's a lot of big name teams that will be willing to throw their money around. Chicago, say, oh, like come work with Bedard and become one of the two, like a 1-2 dynamic punch in hockey. Like there's a lot of opportunity that McDavid does not sign an extension.
Yeah, I Oilers fans would probably hate me saying this, but I mean, Los Angeles is a thought as well. You go the Gretzky route. Difference is Gretzky won 4 times at Edmonton. I think that would be a real killer. But the Kings have guys like Kempe and Mikey Anderson, and that could be a place where maybe they build around him there.
Yeah, that's for sure here. So we have a lot of fun to watch the NHL season play out down the stretch here, Chris. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. If you want to follow on social media, keep up with your pod. How can I do that?
Yeah, you can find us at Sports in the Waiting Room. We prefer you watch us or listen to us on Spotify. That really helps with our potential ad revenue and our listenership. But you can find us anywhere you listen to your podcasts. And yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Chris Russo 98 and on Instagram at Chris Russo 1998.